Welcome to video notes for summarizing a narrative text. To complete these notes, you're going to need your notebook. You will need a pen or pencil to write with, and we're going to be using two colors for color coding. You'll need a yellow and a red. So you can grab colored pencils or crayons, but I don't recommend markers because it'll soak through and ruin your notes on the other side. All right, let's get started. You're going to turn to your next blank two-page spread. We're going to be putting our notes on one side, and then we're leaving the other side available so that we can summarize what we read in class. Oops, I went too far. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start by writing the title at the top, and this is called Summarizing a Narrative. Remember, with a video, you can pause at any point to get caught up, and then start the video again when you are all caught up. So for summarizing a narrative, let's remember what a narrative is. A narrative is a story, usually with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this would be different from informational, which is teaching you something. To build these notes, we're actually going to have a little doodle over here on the side. So let's start by being about halfway between this red margin line and the edge of the page. I'm going to go down 8 lines. 2, 4, 6, 8. And then I'll go over about 3 fingers worth. And I'll repeat that line straight down. And close it up to make a rectangle. This is going to be like the page of a book. And so we're going to put some writing on that page, but it's going to be pretend writing. It's going to represent writing. So we're going to write it like little squiggles. So I'm going to start with an indent, like I'm starting a new paragraph, and then keep going after that, like I'm writing a paragraph. And then maybe start a new one. But this is going to be the narrative that we are summarizing. So let's start with what it means to summarize. When you summarize, and I'm going to use a check mark to represent the stuff you do, and then we'll use an X later to represent the stuff you don't do. So when you summarize, you want to find the most important key details. In order to figure out what is the most important, I like to ask myself a question. I like to ask, is this necessary for the story? In other words, if we took this out of the story, would anything really change? So is this fact just interesting, or does it help us understand what's going on in the story? So let's go ahead and grab our yellow. We use yellow a lot for key details in ELA, so we're going to use it for key details here. In a summary, we want to include the most important key details. We'll know they're the most important because they are necessary. So in our example drawing over here, as you read the story, you will sometimes find things that are super important to the story. Those would be those necessary key details. But sometimes you find stuff that isn't, and then later you find more really important stuff. These would be the most important key details. All right, I'm switching back to my pencil because there's some stuff we don't want in a summary, so I'm going to put an X. These are the things we don't want. We want to leave out elaboration, and we also want to leave out non-essential details. And that's why we're asking ourselves, is this necessary for the story? If it's just elaboration, it's telling me more about something, that doesn't go in my summary. And if it's non-essential, it's something that's interesting, but it doesn't change what's going on in the story, those are non-essential, we want to leave them out. So go ahead and grab your red. We want to leave out elaboration. We want to leave out non-essential details. So going back to my doodle here, my drawing, a lot of your story will actually be those elaborative pieces, that elaboration, or non-essential details. They make the story interesting. I enjoy reading them. But when I'm giving someone a summary of what's important in the story, I don't need to include that. It's not a big part of the story. Small details that make it interesting. Remember, you can pause at any point if you need to catch up in this section before moving on to the next section. So we talked about what a summary is. We talked about how summaries are built from most important key details and they leave out non-essential things. So now let's talk about a strategy. The strategy I'm going to teach you today has an acronym. It is the SWBST strategy. Each of these letters represents a word in our strategy. So our strategy is somebody wanted, but, so, then. Now you may have heard this before in a different order, or you might have teachers in the future that flip these last two, and they might say somebody wanted, but then so. It really works the same way. I've seen it in different places across the country. Do what works for you, but in class, this is the order we're going to practice just so we're all together. That being said, if you've learned a different strategy, it doesn't mean your strategy is wrong. It's really the same idea. So let's start with somebody. Somebody would be the main character. And their essential traits. Remember, essential means most important. If my character really likes chocolate or has blonde hair, and it's interesting, but it's not important to the story, it's not essential. But if it's really essential that my main character, like in the movie Wild Robot, it's really essential that I know my main character is a robot. That would be an essential trait. So think about what the reader needed to know about the character for the story to make sense. Next we have wanted. Wanted is the main character's goal. Sometimes this takes the form of something the character wants to achieve or get, and sometimes it takes the form of something the character wants to get away from. So the goal could be to get something or to get away from something. Next is but, and this would be the conflict or problem. Remember, conflict means problem. The conflict or problem in the story. In other words, what's holding the character back from having their goal? Is there something that's keeping them in a dangerous area so they can't escape? Is there somebody who wants the same thing as them and so they're in competition? What's really keeping your character from their goal? Then we have so. So is how the character tries to solve their problem or achieve their goal. In other words, the steps they take toward achieving their goal. finally, we have then. Then is how the story ends. All right, I'll leave that up in case you need to check any of your notes or make any updates, but this is the big idea. We need to know how to summarize a narrative. We need to be able to explain the most important parts. We know when we summarize, we're looking for the most important key details by asking ourselves, are these details necessary for understanding the story? We want to leave out any elaboration or information that's not important to the storyline, no matter how interesting. And one way to do this is to use the somebody wanted but so then strategy, where we start by telling who is the main character and their essential traits. We explain the character's goal. We tell the conflict or problem in the story and explain how the character attempts to solve it, and end by telling the ending of the story. How is it finished? Thank you for taking your notes with me.